take you guys through kind of a timeline of history, a visual timeline of where our church came from to get to where it is today. Share some stories that were very interesting to me that I learned. And then, as kind of a bonus, there are 3 mysteries of this church that nobody's been able to solve yet. And I ran into them early on and started asking around. I haven't been able to get answers to these questions, so I want to see if anybody in this room knows anything more. We kind of solved one of them in the other meeting that we had a month ago or so. But just to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm a marketing consultant, and history is my hobby. It just happens to be my hobby. Mitzi is actually a history major in college. So when we met, we kind of had that in common too, but I didn't have a degree, so she kind of tells me the right way to do it. Not just the fun way to do it, but the right way to do it. And so we were talking earlier, she's worked for, she did an internship with the Supreme Court, did an internship at the Smithsonian while she was still in college. And she ended up going into this program called Teach for America right after she graduated. And that's where we met. She was teaching at an inner city school in Houston, and I was living in Houston at the time. So that's a little bit more background. But why am I talking about the history today? We got a call, Mitzi and I got a call about a year and a half ago. So this coming summer, it'll be 2 years. And they said, we have your appointment for where you're going to be moving to. Are you ready? They said, first of all, you're moving to Chapel Hill. And I was like, yes, because I always wanted to live in Chapel Hill. We always come visit it. And she actually went to school here, which is one of the reasons why we come visit it. And so I was excited about that. And then they said, you're going to be at University United Methodist Church. And so, okay, so you start Googling, right? And first thing you find is the picture of the church. I'm like, beautiful church. It looks like an old church. Yay. Because I always told her, I'm not going to be the pastor's wife who sings in the choir. Okay? That's not me. But I can help with the history. That I'm passionate about it. It'd be fun for me. And so I was like, old church, great. So we went and visited the church, looked up at the steeple, and we're like, how old is this? And we were thinking, okay, is it 75 years old? Is it 200 years old? Because you can't really tell by the architecture, because it's kind of colonial sort of architecture, so who knows? But little did we know, this was the 5th place where this church met. And so I'm going to take you through the timeline of those 5 places that we met and some of the stories that went along with that. Some of you may know them, some of them are pretty interesting. So first thing I did is I drew a picture of our church. So this is my animation skills here. And what I wanted to do is show it visually. I was talking to Carl and some of the others about people kind of know where we started over here. We may have moved here, but they don't really know the timeline. And you don't just want a timeline on this date. We did this. That's history 101 that everybody gets bored with. So you kind of want to see it. So once you see this, it'll probably be a really good thing. All right. One thing that I did want to do is this presentation, I'm going to be emailing this out. I need to do a little bit of work on it. And I'm going to turn this into a video, kind of an animated video, and put it on YouTube. So I'm going to pass this around. If you want me to send this to you, just put your name and email address on here, and I'll send it. I forgot to do this at our last thing. At our last meeting we did. I regretted it. But by the way, this is our history book. I don't know if any of you have seen this. And this was written in 1953. So this is the last time, this was basically the 100-year anniversary of one of our first church buildings when this was written. But it's got a lot of dry stuff.
A single person?
It's by a committee of people, and there are different chapters written by different people and have one editor. Different histories have been written since then, kind of as an addendum to this, but nothing's been written in a while. And I'm on the Records and History Committee, so that's what we're starting to work on. That's good. All right. So let's take you through the timeline. Let's go, first let me get you acclimated here. All right, so here's where we're at on the map. So this is pretty obvious to everybody, but got Franklin and Rosemary Street over here. And Henderson, everybody knows where Henderson is. And then Columbia Street, going out to Hillsborough over there. Okay. So back when we started, that's where Orange Methodist Church was in 1839. So they had only been around for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that at that time. They had just founded. But they had a little church building over there. And so
It was way out in the country, I guess.
and it was a long way away. You think about that walk if you live right here. And this is about how it looked back then, right? It was all trees. If you can imagine this white space being trees. And a few houses along Franklin Street and things like that.
So that was where Orange is now?
That's, the same spot, the same little plot of land.
It's
It's
a
not the
long
same,
Oh, it was, you're right.
not the same building, but the same place. And then we moved over to a little house on on Rosemary, right behind the Presbyterian church where that is. And then we moved over to Franklin Street. And you know where the Krispy Kreme Donuts was up until 6 months ago? That's where it was right there. And we were right there. We rented that space right above. It wasn't Krispy Kreme, and actually this was not the building. The building they have there now is only about 80 years old. And then we built our first church right over here. Does everybody know where that church is? Okay. All right. I'll show you in a minute.
Gordon, you're
Yes.
saying that we were, before we came to this church, were we not on the corner of, Henderson and Rosemary?
That's where our first
That's where
church
your
building
area
was.
is. Isn't it closer
Yeah.
to that corner? Like,
It's right on that corner. The structure itself touches both corners.
But
I'll show you a picture in a minute.
it's a different structure, is it?
No,
No.
it's the
Okay.
same. Yeah, that's amazing. 'Cause
oh, I see, yeah.
that's one of the things that got me really interested is I found the address of our original church. They actually had an address. And I Googled it. And you look at the overhead view, and there it was. It's still there. And rarely does a church last 170 years not being a church, and not being used for other things. It's not going to stick around. So, and it's been used for a lot of other things. So our second church in 1889 was, as you can see, it's right here close to where we are today. And then the third church, the building we see today, but it's only an L shape at that time in 1926. And then it took the place of that, our education wing. So that's us today. That's where it is today. But let me take you through a little bit of some of the stories and what it looked like back then. First of all, this is Franklin Street back in 1890, one of the oldest pictures of Franklin Street that there is. And you can see it's just a dirt road back then. I looked up all these buildings that you see in this picture are not there anymore. These are all gone from 1890. But the stones on the side are probably still there, that same exact stones. Now this is looking towards Carborough. So looking towards Carborough there, and you're right now next to the planetarium. Okay, so we're standing right next to the planetarium looking that way. And if this was 1890, our church would be right behind this building right here. So our church today is right behind that building, but the one there was probably had just been built. It was fresh right then. Now there's one thing in this picture that's really interesting. I started looking down the street here. You see that little structure there? It's kind of hard to see. I'll zoom in on it here in a second. That little structure, let's zoom in. You'll see it a little bit better there.
Well,
The well.
That's a well, right? There were 2 wells in Chapel Hill at that time where people came to water their horses, to get water, actually, because there wasn't running water going from house to house in 1890. And that's where they would go, and our church was located on that land. So behind that well is where our church is today. And probably if you go out to the curb, you might see a little plaque on the ground that says well, water, or something like that. I haven't looked to see, but there might be something like that. So, but to go back to the origins here, we started at Orange Church. I don't know how many people, might have been 10 or 20 people who were actually from Chapel Hill. And we're having to go down that road, a very rutted messed up road on horseback or walking. It's how many miles? About 3 miles or so, something like that. Take you half a day to get down there. So, and here's what it looked like. This picture was taken in the 1800s, so we think that this is what Orange Church looked like in the 1800s, the original building. And that's some of the people, the members, one of the original pictures of members of Orange Church. But that's probably like the 1860s, 1870s. We would have left there 30 years before that. But there was something somebody wrote about this, about us leaving that church. It said, according to Cornelia Phillips Spencer, the Chapel Hill Methodists, who held membership in the Orange Church, began to thirst for ministrations less staid and formal than those afforded by college professors, and took steps for holding meetings of their own. So that was the reason for leaving. They didn't want staid and formal. So then they went and started meeting at this house. A man by the name of Miles Davis, who was a member of the church, that was his house. Just like this we're doing here today, this was about what they were probably doing when they were originally meeting. But then they got too big for that, so they rented a room up here, like I was telling you before. And at that time, they had about 60 people by the time they were renting that room. And this is our first pastor, Charles Force Deems. And he was a professor at UNC. And up in that room up above where Krispy Kreme was, here's what it said. It said, little is known of the first congregation, but its members included 64 whites and 8 Negroes, probably slaves. And the room was without furniture, except backless pine benches and a cloth-covered table for a pulpit. This is a reenactment of that, by the way, that we did. And this is Cynthia's son. That she told me. I had no idea. And she was sitting in the front row. That's my son. And it says, it was lighted at night by tallow candles set in wooden sockets. The contrast between the material crudeness and the elegance of the preaching was unmistakable. But you look at the Chapel Hill and you look at UNC at that time. Here we are today. Here's to contrast the size difference. Today we have 3,700 faculty last year. Who wants to make a guess? In 1844, and our faculty was, our preacher was one of the faculty. How many faculty do you think UNC had at that time? Keep in mind, it was 60 years old at this point. It had been founded in the 1700s.
20.
20? Any other guesses?
50.
50? Smaller? Bigger? Well, here, surprising to me, I stumbled on this picture. That was the faculty of UNC in 1844. And the reason why I kept this picture is because I looked down and I recognized that picture, which was on the previous slide, of Charles Force Deems. So he was one of the faculty there in their group photo. But it just shows you how few photos were taken back there. When you look at that photo there, it's the exact same photo there.
He looks fairly young compared to some of the others.
Yeah. So he was only with us for about 3 years or so, which was very common in Methodist church back then. Usually about 3 years and you move on to somewhere else. All right, so you got the first church then, and here it is today. So I took this picture this summer, and that's, do you recognize this?
Yeah.
That's the original church right there, not this part here, but that's the original church. And this is the oldest photo I've been able to find of this church. And this is when it was 100 years old by this point. So that's what it looked like right after World War II. At that time, it was a garage. And it was mostly fixing airplanes. Airplanes. So if you look over here on the side, that was the door that they brought in the cars and trucks and airplane wings. Mostly during World War II, they were fixing a lot of airplanes because it was a big thing in World War II. Big new thing in World War II for the military. But you look at that little addition on the side there, and you see it's still here today mostly. That's today, by the way, that's an apartment dentist office, and there's some other things back there, I'm not sure what. I actually walked in there one day into the dentist office, and there was Bill Olson getting his teeth cleaned. I looked into Bill Olson's mouth, say, "Hey, Bill."
Gordon,
Would you?
Yes.
in the, maybe even before 48, was there a steeple on that building?
That's the
Like you
question,
showed.
isn't it?
I don't know whether it was a drawing or whether it was actually a photograph, but there was a steeple?
That's the question I'll hit right next, okay?
Okay.
So, first of all, here's all the things I'll just show you this. It was sold to a black church in 1890, right after we moved to that second church. And it became the first integrated school in Chapel Hill. Auto airplane garage. Webb Architects really fixed it up and made it into kind of what it is today. It was Women's Crisis Center, a bunch of businesses, and today it's a software company. And like I said, a dentist and an apartment. So that's it today. You go inside there today, that's what you'll see. You see those exposed beams. When the company, and those are the original beams, if you look at them, they were sawed by hand in 1853. This is a loft here. So this is not the bottom, it actually goes down, way down here. So there's the staircase right that goes down. But I just walked in there one day, and the guy who owns it, the software company owner, he's passionate about restoration, and he restored this thing just beautifully. Because you couldn't even see up there, it had like 3 ceilings. And there was no loft, I don't think. It had 3 ceilings he tore out. All those, they had just been added one after the other over the years. He took them all out and just beautiful work and added those skylights.
Gordon,
Yeah,
somehow I missed where that is. Is it on Henderson Street?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So here's
Facing Rosemary.
this is Rosemary
Yeah.
right here, and that's Henderson. And here we are. Here's our church over here.
Okay.
Okay, right there in the corner. Another interesting thing about this is, see those bricks on the side? They don't match that church. They're connected to it. They don't match the church. This is made of stucco. Back then, you know, all the school buildings were made of stone to make them look Roman, Greek sort of thing, made by real stone. Real stone is very expensive. So what they did, and they couldn't afford that, so they built it stucco, and they actually made grooves in it to make it look like there were stones. And the architect, not the architect, but the software business owner was showing me all that. But you look at this is made of brick right next door. So back right after the Civil War, there was a black family that started a brick making company. And they became the de facto brick makers in Chapel Hill. And you go look at those bricks, you go touch those bricks, and you can tell they're about 150 years old. So most of those bricks were probably made by the black family and the black church that bought this. And this was the school. So what they did is they added on this to make it a church/school. And so that's how it served for a number of years. But if you go back, like we were right here. So I went up into this, and the software business owner says, look up there, that's where the steeple went. That's the steeple frame. See this kind of a box frame up there? That's not an accident. Nobody goes to that kind of trouble unless you want to put a big old steeple on that. And that's about 6 feet across. So we're talking really pretty big steeple for that size building. So this is what really got me going. I was like, nobody told me there was a steeple in this church. And so I started researching, going to the libraries over at UNC, trying to find any kind of photos of this building from as far back as possible. And the oldest one I've ever found was that 1948 picture. Never found a picture of the church of Rosemary Street. No pictures were taken of Rosemary. It's all Franklin, if you find any pictures back then. So I've never been able to find a steeple. So I made up my own. Okay. All right, so here's some options here on steeples. And you can kind of think, what do you think it would have been? So it could have been something simple like this, really kind of almost to let hot air out the building, really. It could have been a little bit more ornate, or or it could have been more like that. All likelihood it was more like that, because that was a serious structure. And you look at that, it's a lot like what we have today, when you think about it. And my son helped me with this, and so he made up his own steeple. And it's like a Grange Superside steeple.
Okay.
He said, whatever you want, it doesn't matter. What did it look like? And so that's what he came up with. All right, so going back to our second church. So we sold that, and then we started this one in 1889. Here's two pictures I found of that second church, which is gone now, of course.
Pretty.
It's a very asymmetrical building. You know, it's every angle you take it from, it's almost like an optical illusion. Trying to draw this thing was really hard because it's got so many peaks and
I wondered why you took the back, why you drew the back.
that was the best angle to see all the churches in one picture,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, I had to make it look real. But do you notice there's a difference between these two pictures? This is the same church, taken from the same exact angle.
Steeple, for
The
sure.
staple's not there on the right one.
That's right. So this was a church, you look at the clothes they have on here, and this looks like a bunch of teenagers. If you get closer, you can see it. It looks like it's probably 1940s, 1950s. This picture I know was taken around 1900. So it started with a steeple, and I was asking Bill Olson, who's on the Records and History Committee with me, I was asking him, what happened to that steeple? He said, I think a storm blew it down or something like that. Well, I did find something that said lightning struck the steeple, burned it down. So they replaced it with a brick structure, which is what people always do when things burn down, is you get brick as opposed to wood. But you look at this is all wood right up here onto the top. So that's what they had for about 50 years on that steeple, without the steeple. So there's my lightning striking. All right. So you all recognize this, right next to the sanctuary. That stained glass came from that second church. So if you go back to that second church on, I think, yeah, that's it right there. That piece of stained glass, you can kind of see the figures. It's very different from this one. This was actually just one piece sort of stained glass. And this was, they found this in crates underneath the church. Nobody knew what it was, and they took it out. And they had forgotten. They saved it, put it in crates, packed it away really good, and then somebody found it back in 1990 or so, and then they went and had it completely restored. It's beautiful. Yeah. And that was a picture from the newspaper in 1990 when they had just restored it. So mystery number 2, though, the round stained glass in the church. In the other, so that's in a stairwell. The other stairwell, do you know the round stained glass that's up there? Well, I asked about that, and somebody said, oh, yeah, somebody just built that recently or something like that. Well, I was talking, again, to Bill Olson, who seems to have the longest memory of anybody. And I was showing him this picture that I found over in the library. This is a picture of the back of the church, again, the back of the second church, and they had added this on as they were growing quite a bit. And this was kind of the Sunday school building that they added on, kind of a temporary structure. But he was looking at this picture and he said, that's it. That is it. That's the stained glass. Because he had never seen a picture of the back of the church, which is completely different from the church. But there's right behind that steam you see coming out, there's a round stained glass about that big, and that's most likely what it is. And the last meeting we had, we all kind of agreed that that's what it was. So we'll go with that. But this is interesting. I took this summer. Not this summer. I took a picture of this summer, trying to recreate the exact place. And I found the exact place where this photo was taken in 1925. It was up in Hill Hall behind us, up on the second floor, the far window. So I went up there, took the picture. Unfortunately, at that time, it was covered in leaves. So just recently, I was able to get up there during the construction that they're doing, and I was able to get a clearer spot. But if you look here, these are some of the original buildings here. All right, this is Hyde Hall, side of Hyde Hall, which is a kind of a new structure, so it wasn't there at the time. But right there is they're digging the basement. I don't know if this is groundbreaking day. It said it was, but I'm not sure. They're digging out the basement about the place where that ramp is. You know the ramp that goes down into the fellowship hall? So that's where they would have been digging. Everybody seems very interested in this. It must be some fancy machine they brought in because it's got smokestacks. You can't see them here. Smokestacks, smoke coming out this way, so they're burning something, and then steam coming out this. So steam shovel. We'll go with that being what it was called. All right. Here's another interesting thing I thought. This is our bell today. And this is a letter from the bell manufacturers in 1890. And it's a letter to say, sorry, we're a little late on making your bell, but it's going to be great when you get it. That's basically what that is. And it's a letter to Mr. Barbie, who was a prominent member of the church at the time, from the owner of this. And by the way, I Googled this company, and that company is still making bells today.
Where is it?
In Baltimore. So that's where it came from. And I even had the invoice, all written in script, like looks like Thomas Jefferson's sort of script. Here's shipping cost, and I think it was like $500 at the time.
Wow.
So,
And
Now-
Gordon, excuse me,
yeah.
our bell is not automated, is that right? And
No.
it has to be run
Yeah.
by a rope or whatever, and
Yeah, the
maybe that's
ushers.
one reason we don't hear it that much.
Right.
It's
The
not
ushers have
automated.
it.
The ushers are
Uh-huh.
supposed, or the people that have the sound system are, I
They're
think
supposed to
the ones
ring it.
that are supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Well, now that sometimes young people are doing the sound system, and so it may not get done as much as.
Yeah. If you go up there, and I have, fortunately went up there all the way to the top of the steeple, that's what the bell looks like, but it's got two big straps. I don't know, you can't see them in this picture. Maybe that, two big straps holding it down. It's because when they're doing it, the ushers they hadn't done it many times, so they pulled so hard it flipped the bell over on its side because they didn't know how hard you had to pull. But if you go over to, what is the tower over on UNC campus, that's all controlled by computers. So they just put in, they can play songs on it and stuff like that. But, so moving on to our church. So this was what our church looked like. It was somebody's house. And this is the Barbie house. So the same family, and it was a prosperous family in town. That was their house. You look back here, you can see the second church. It's right there over on the side. And you can actually kind of see the steeple. So the steeple was still there at the time. But this is two kids, just a great photo. I love this photo. It's two kids, and they've got two cows pulling them on some sort of carriage, little carriage. Turns out that one of these guys ended up being pretty famous because he owned the Ford dealership down the street. You know where the deli is, Jasmine Deli now? That was originally a Ford dealership, and that was the guy who owned it. So that's why they kept this picture, it's a neat picture. But that's the same exact spot there. See this right there, that's where the ATM machine is, right next to us, the Bank of America, I guess. So you can't, it's cut off, it's a little bit cut off, but that was there in 1903 too.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
do you know if one of those guys is a Stroud?
I don't know.
In the picture?
It sounds familiar, it might be. I'm
Because
not
they
sure.
did have the Ford dealership here.
Okay.
And I'm
I've
wondering-
got the picture, I've got a photo of the picture in the back of the picture where it has a description. I'll look and see, and it gives the names of who the kids are. Yeah. Okay.
We had an ATM machine in 1903.
It's there now.
Oh, I thought you,
In
okay.
that picture, it's an ATM machine. I don't know what, it was a closed store at that time. But you know, this is the building where the coffee shop is, right? The Carolina Coffee Shop, which is the oldest surviving restaurant in North Carolina.
Really?
Yeah, 19.
Really, the Carolina Coffee House?
In the whole state of North Carolina, oldest continuing operation restaurant.
Yeah.
And
What does
so
it date back to? Do you know?
1923, I think.
23?
So it was only 2 years old when our church was built. And you can think about those guys who were standing out in that cold weather. They might have had coffee from the Carolina Coffee Shop. All right, so then we had the education wing. And here's another interesting story. Does anybody recognize this? You know where that's at? It's on the side of the education wing. We got that little, I'm not sure what it's called. It's in the courtyard. And you have the little gate fancy gate there. And right in there, if you walk in there, you'll see that on a little bench, underneath the bench. Well, that church, the education wing, was obviously not built in 1887 because it was 1960 when that education wing was added. And it was not the Methodist Episcopal Church South either, right? But in 1887, that was the name of our church. It was the Methodist Episcopal Church South, or the congregation, or not our church, but that's what we were a part of. Because during the Civil War, the Methodist Church broke up into two parts, south and north, before the Civil War. It was like 10, 15 years. And it stayed that way for a while. That's where it was broken up into two different things. And also the Methodists and the Episcopals had merged together at that time. And I asked Carl, how many names have we had as a church? Because I looked even at this book, 1953, the Chapel Hill Methodist Church. So I really haven't done a good job of figuring out how many names, but it's at least 6 names that we've had. And I'm not sure what the original name was.
But it became University United Methodist after we joined with the Brethren Church, right?
I'm not sure what all that, but it started as, it became the Methodist Church, no Episcopal. The South went away. And then United, there were several Methodist churches, and they all came together to become united. And I think that was in the 1970s, 60s, something like that.
Wasn't our original name Orange?
The original, the church we went to, the founders of our church went to Orange. And then they moved and they started their own church. And that's when we were officially founded as a church.
Okay, so you wouldn't call Orange the original?
You just say that's where some of our members started. Yeah. That was the only game in town at that time. Yeah. Okay. Here's another then and now photo that I took. So I found this great color photo from the 1960s, actually 1960. And and this was taken at Christmas, and I took this one at Christmas this year. So same tree sort of format. There's not too much difference here. It's all the pews are the same. So we've got probably the original pews from 1925, but lots of changes in here. And you probably remember 1998. Lots of uproar over that. So basically this stage came further out and it flattened, everything flattened, and the banisters went away and it became kind of a movable space where you move around. But I heard that was a lot of people left over that. When changes happen in the church, people leave. All right. My last mystery I'll share with you today. Let's see if we can figure this one out. Harriet Cole's silver communion set. This was from the Chapel Hill newspaper in 1957. This photo was taken. And it was such big news that they found this silver communion set. And here's some members of our church posing for photos. I don't know what their names are. That was owned by, that was given to the church in the 1860s during the Civil War by a lady named Harriet Cole, who is a famous philanthropist, I guess, of Chapel Hill. So she helped the poor and started all these programs that really helped out. And that's a picture of her in the same newspaper article with her nephew in that photo. That was taken about 1910. I think she's around 90 years old at that time. Interesting thing, I saw this photo somewhere else in Chapel Hill. I was like, that's the same photo. You know where Staples is on East Franklin Street? There's a Wells Fargo, Wells Fargo right next to it. And they have a mural outside. And it's like, UNC soccer players and basketball and different scenes. And they have that picture there. It's like, why would they have that picture there? I mean, she must have been really famous. Well, it turns out her nephew worked at the Chapel Hill Bank. And the Chapel Hill Bank was later bought by Wells Fargo. And so that was evidently their oldest picture they had of somebody in Chapel Hill working for the bank. I guess. I know that's what it was because it actually says in the caption, who was a banker for Chapel Hill Bank. So we had 3 mysteries today. Nobody knows about the vanished steeple. Who knows if we did have a steeple? Maybe they just built this frame and said, we'll add a steeple later when we get more money. That's a possibility too. And I think the round stained glass we've got that one. Okay. And the silver communion set is lost. Nobody knows, so it got lost again. And I was like going through cupboards and stuff like that, looking for it, asked Carl, asked everybody, and they gave me a list of people in the church to ask, but nothing. So it might be sitting in some box somewhere, who knows? But that if it is, if we did find that, that would be the oldest thing that we have from this church. Because as far as I know, there's nothing from that original church in 1853 in our entire church. Because I've been looking at like some of the furniture, there's lots of little tables and stuff sitting around. But I think what happened when we sold that church to another church, we left everything except we took our Bible and we kept that, but we left, the whatever was in there at the time.
How about where they found the tall stained glass window, like under the church?
Yeah, the crawl space.
They looked for it there?
I don't think they knew it was missing at the time. Yeah, so this is just something I stumbled on. And
You're just gonna have to go into the church and root around.
I have.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know about like that
There you go.
under there, but it's all, dirt. It's not a lot of boxes under there. It's mostly HVAC, which they had to add to the church at some point. So that's what I have. Is there any questions that you got? Any stories that I missed that you all have heard?
I think one real important story, Gordon, that may not be significant in our thought process right now is when the air conditioning was added. I can remember going to a wedding in the church and being so hot, it was August, and thinking, I am never coming to another wedding in this church in August. And so if you could pull the date and just sort of mention that in your history, because it is really important.
Do you remember what year that wedding was?
No, I know who got married,
It's
I
like
don't
the
remember the year.
70s or so,
But
60s.
that is so important because we put up with no air conditioning for so long. It was unbelievable.
We came here in 1987 and it's been since that. That and the elevator have been since that.
Okay, since 87. Well, I can ask this gal when she got married.
Yeah, I have seen it somewhere. I don't know when it was.
Mhm.
I have to go back
I
and
would
see
think
what I
that
found.
would be too hard to
Yeah,
research.
we still have a lot of records on stuff that was added, maintenance sort of receipts and things like that. We've got a whole closet full of boxes, but unfortunately none of that is really previous to this church that we're in today. Because things get lost and thrown away when people move. They're not important then, but who knows, they're important 100 years later, but they people
I'm
don't
going
think
to
about it.
ask this gal and let you know.
Okay.
Is that communion set inscribed in any way? If someone found it in their attic, would they even know what that was?
I don't know. We'd have to look at maybe we could put it in one of our newsletters and say,
Yeah.
if you have seen anything like this, let us know.
If anybody
Yeah.
knows the whereabouts.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
was just wondering, I wonder if the value of silver then was what it is now, so that maybe it wasn't considered such an extravagant stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I know my brother is a big silver buyer sort of guy, and silver prices are crazy these days because there's evidently a shortage. But I think probably since they call it silverware, it was probably a lot cheaper back then to make everything
Yes.
for high end.
I have a friend who is in a Presbyterian church in Fayetteville, and they wrapped all of their silver in a pillowcase and dropped it in their well when Sherman came through.
Right.
And they were able to save it, and the church experienced quite a bit of damage, so
Yeah.
who knows?
Did any of you ever see the movie Braveheart?
Yes.
Okay, the end of the movie this is kind of the same thing. The end of the movie Braveheart, they get their independence from England. So the Scots win finally. And so that was in 1300 or something like that. Well, They kept their independence till the 1600s, but the English took it back again. But they had their own set of crown jewels. For the Scots had their own, not as nice as the English crown jewels, but really, sword and all this kind of stuff. Well, somebody hid those crown jewels somewhere as the English were taking over, and then they got lost. Nobody remembered them. And then they found them, I don't know what year, it was like the 1900s sometimes, somebody found those. So now you can go to Scotland and see the crown jewels. But yeah.
I've always thought it was kind of unusual because our church is so beautiful and everything, but that they did not put stained glass windows in, so many churches.
We were talking about that at the last meeting too. Why no stained glass windows? I don't know what the choices were there. They were certainly spending enough money on that church to be able to afford that steeple. Was crazy expensive.
And somebody just recently said, there's really nothing in the church because there's no stained glass window or there's no special thing up in the chancel area, in that arched area, that really tells you it's a church, and they were complaining about that.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
My argument would be is that a church with stained glass is a dark church.
Yeah.
It's true.
Stained glass blocks light. That makes it prettier light, but it blocks light. If this was stained glass, we'd be pretty dark in here. So it's, I think that's part of it. And it might have been, I'm conjecturing here, but it might have been the style of the time, 1925. So many styles in churches have changed. Mitzi was telling me about the history of churches back to the 1600s and just the things that became fashionable. So there was a period when people spent a lot of money on being ornate in a church. And then there was a lashback period to where they were saying, that's not godly, that's not Jesus. Jesus would have never done that, so clear windows. So it's kind of a back, and it's just a fashion and just the culture of the times.
Well, Gordon, we really appreciate your coming and being with us today.
I'm so
I
glad.
just loved the presentation.
Great.
It
Okay.
gave us a lot of information we probably were not aware of.
This is really
And I'm going to turn that whole animation that I had, I'm going to turn that into a video, put it on YouTube, and also, thank you. And I'm on the Records and History Committee. If anybody's interested in getting involved in something like that, just let me know.